All right, perfect. So it's now 7:03. I'll call the Town of Milton School Building Committee meeting to order on June 10th, 2024. As we typically do, we'll do a roll call attendance. Almost perfect timing. Again, Aqua is will be in attendance. If we should go Glenn Hoffman.
Here.
Selena Miranda.
Here.
Scott Dereshak.
Present.
Aqua Bond.
Present.
John Cohen.
Present.
Carrie Hurley.
Present.
Michelle here. Second thing on the agenda is citizen speak. We reserve the first 15 minutes of the meeting for any citizen that wants to speak. We ask that you just raise your hand and state your name and address. Just looking, there's nobody in attendance, and just keep an eye on the queue just for a minute. See if anybody has any questions. Seeing none. All right. Third thing on the agenda is approval of past meeting minutes, Monday, June 3rd, 2024. So everybody got a copy of their meeting packet from Seamus from PMA. So just seeing if there's any questions or comments in regards to the previous meeting minutes. Good job. So just need a motion to approve it in a second.
So moved.
Moved by Selena. Second by Scott. All right. We're all in attendance, so there's nobody remote, so we're not hybrid. So all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna abstain.
Two abstentions.
Moving right along. Item 4, old business discussion update, architect update. So with us tonight from Arrow Street, we have a full team here. Two things we want to talk about. First is review some of the site diagrams. So, if you guys recall last time we met, we went over some of the block diagrams for rooms and quantities and stuff like that. They've started putting massing together for them and assembling them on the site. So we will see some options. And then after we kind of go through the site options and stuff like that, Kate, I can't pronounce your last name, I apologize. Okay, thank you. We'll be talking about some sustainability options that's going to pair into our pricing exercise too. So with that, Chanel,
Yeah,
Larry,
great.
I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thanks. So in
Sure. Hold on 1 second. Just gonna Shane is co-host. Sorry about that.
You seeing that on your screen?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we're going to talk through 4 options. The team's been taking all the information from the past visioning workshops and getting clarity, as we discussed last week, on the square footages and putting down some ideas on the site. And we've also included where there are opportunities for entrance and drive lanes, and you start to see how the building lays out on the site. So we'll have 4 options. We'll have an aerial plan of adjacency diagram and a massing diagram for each option. We'll just go off of this.
Yeah. Let me just stand up here.
Yeah, a lot easier.
If you want this one will advance the slides down and go back. So this first slide is sort of a overall illustrated plan of the property in question, and then also we wanted to show its proximity to Milton High School, existing athletic fields, and other existing roads. And as well, we wanted to show the land conservation area that's to be preserved, along with a 50-foot buffer and then an additional 50-foot zoning buffer that we're respecting in the options that you're going to see to provide 100 feet of separation from any proposed work and this southerly property line. And we're going to basically zoom into this area that's a little bit lighter in color. That's sort of the site, and the following diagrams are going to kind of take us through that. So just to orient everybody, here's that athletic field again. This is the proposed new Guile Road. This is that shape that we were just looking at, but it's larger now. This is a little bit of Milton High School here, and it's parking lot. And so we've got 4 options that we're going to look at, each one sort of contemplating a different way that the building, the middle school, the PK, and parking for each of them might play out on the site. And we have just some, on the upper left, some sort of key attributes for each scheme and a parking count that the scheme kind of generates. And to just kind of walk you through this first one, the idea here is that we're concentrating the core academic programs in a sort of a bar element that's justified towards the athletics field side of the property. And what that does, that allows us space off of Guile Road to propose the middle school parking along with a pretty decent sized bus lane and car drop off. Separate parking for the pre-K and a separate loop for pickup and drop off to the pre-K. In this scheme, the middle school entrance is considered to be here on the north side of the building, this red arrow, and the pre-K entrance on the south side shown by this red arrow. Altogether, this is showing about 142 parking spaces. Through the visioning, the pre-K had asked for 50 parking spaces. And we don't have an official count that we need for the middle school yet, but the count of what's existing at Pierce is 111. And so we're targeting around 100. We think that they should be, hopefully we can do with a few, somewhat fewer than what's at Pierce now. All of this will be further developed, as things move forward. You'll see that the sort of shared public, the gym, auditorium, cafeteria, those types of programs are going to be located in the middle of the site. And this scheme looks at having the pre-K as a part of the building and located on the first 2 floors on the south side. Here, so I can go. So if this was sort of a diagram of looking at the first floor, you'll see that we've got the sort of academic spaces for the middle school located in this area, the entry, administration, and a sort of vertical circulation zone, sort of at the knuckle, in the heart of everything. The pre-K in its own sort of wing on the south side, and then the common and public programs located over on the other side of the admin. So this allows those spaces to be used after hours, on the weekends, and evening, kind of separated from the academic elements. So this is a 3D view. Want to be clear that this is not yet sort of a proposed design for the building. It's really just about giving you all a sense of, given the number of rooms that we're working with, kind of how many floors we think we're working with, and what that might start to feel like about the kind of general bulk and mass of the building. It's not a design yet. But just to orient you, then we've got Guile Road here with the middle school parking, and then the blue bar is the upper middle school academic classrooms. The purple is the pre-K tucked in on the first 2 levels on the south side, and the sort of light orange color of these shared spaces. And one of the things that this one contemplates for the pre-K is that it gets its own entrance. And even though it's a part of this building, the idea is that it would really be experienced as its own kind of realm, and would have its own play area adjacent to it, and could sort of function, independently as one experiences it from the middle school. And then the next slide is going to be a view of this same scheme, but from a different. So here's Guile Road on the bottom of the image, looking back that way. And so you can kind of imagine, from the road, the parking setup, and then this sort of knuckle being the the entry point for the middle school and these shared spaces. In this version, this bar is 4 stories, and then these spaces here are 2 stories. Anyone have any questions or about this one before we move on to the next?
The size that this is representing.
This is working with the approximately 169,000 gross square feet, which we talked about the last meeting. And we are in parallel working through some, looking at scheduling and things to see about if there's more efficiencies that can be realized in bringing the bulk of the building down somewhat. So option 2 is similarly placing parking along Vale Road. What it's doing is taking the middle school and putting the academic elements in a bar shape that's sort of overlooking towards Vale Road. It places the pre-K as a 2-story volume that is adjacent to the middle school, but not physically connected. We imagine there could be a covered walkway between the two, but it's still primarily a separate structure. And again, you can see the sort of separate loop for the pre-K drop-off and parking. And the parking count of this scheme is about 151 spaces. This is 56, that's 95. There are some things that can be reworked here to, I think, get it a little bit more efficient, but you get the general idea. It's a similar amount of parking.
Same gross square footage?
Yes, yeah.
So
All 4 schemes are used looking at the same amount. So just to kind of look at a first floor adjacency, again, entry to the middle school on the north side here, flanked by administration and a sort of vertical circulation knuckle, with classrooms continuing off in this bar and then stacking up, which you'll see in a moment. The common public spaces coming up behind that and sort of, again, occupying the middle of the site for the gym, auditorium, dining service, and then the pre-K at the 2-story building. Here, one of the things that's nice about this, as opposed to the prior one, is that there's direct access to outdoor space without having to cross a road. That's one of the advantages of having put the parking here to the left, because you can imagine this spilling out into this area.
A quick question.
Yes.
What is the distance between the property line with the neighbors to the middle school building, the upper middle school building?
So from here to here?
Yeah.
Well, 100, 200, I'd say about 300 feet. So in this version, again, this is Vale Road here. So we've got a 4-story volume there, and then it's kind of stepping down as if the masses as you move towards the south. So this is a 4-story volume, 3-story, that's the gym and cafeteria programs, that's a 2-story volume. And then the pre-K is a 2-story volume as well. If you're looking at Vale Road on the bottom. So yeah, this is the property line, that's about 300 feet. The third option contemplates combining the parking into one centralized area that has a sort of a side that services pre-K and a side that's for the middle school. And we imagine that there's a sort of a loop that splits off for the pickup and drop off for the pre-K. But this was a strategy that looked at what if we put the middle school building itself closer to Vale Road and the pre-K building further away. This is showing pre-K as a single-story option. In the next one, we'll see it as in a similar location, but as a 2-story option with potential for expansion. And so this locates our middle school academics in a bar that's sort of adjacent to Guile Road, and it puts the public spaces in this quadrant next to Guile Road as well. And let's go to the next one. Sorry, I forgot to mention, this is about 158 parking spaces as shown here. So here you can see academic and academic, with the entry in this case on the south side of the building, a vertical circulation space and admin flanking that with the common public spaces located here. Pre-K is again starting, and this is sort of an example of the places that's the furthest from the middle school. And then go to, so you can kind of see there's sort of an L shape of the academic spaces, and then the shared items that are on in a more public location on Guile Road. So this is a 4-story, 3-story, 2-story, and a 1-story. From the other direction. The fourth option looks at locating all of the middle school academics in sort of a bent bar that follows Guile Road and locates the shared program spaces sort of cradled by that and more in the middle of the site. This one showed pre-K, the 2-story volume on the south side with a lot of extra space. So you could imagine the potential to, in the future, potentially expand to the right, either with pre-K or some other program. This is the same consolidated parking scenario as we saw in the prior one. One thing that's worth pointing out with this approach is that because the land is at its lowest elevation along Guile Road as compared to up by the athletic field, a 4-story building that's pushed to this site, the top of that building would actually be potentially lower than the top of the 4-story building that we saw in the first scheme that was sort of here next to this. So in terms of if we're thinking about the mass on the site and what's visible and what's not, this is sort of somewhat downhill from the options that have the mass up here. So here again, it's a south main entry for the middle school with a vertical circulation, front side administration, with the academic wings and the common public areas, which again, you can imagine pretty easily being used after hours and separately from those. This version looks at a sort of a stepping option where we've got a 4, then a 3, then a 2-story volume. There's another version of this where, it sort of pulls in a little bit and it's more like a consistent 4-story volume with less of a footprint on the site. These are 2-story, this is 2-story here. So here you can imagine if you're coming up Guile Road, that there's the most kind of building present at first, but then it kind of starts to step down and become less imposing as you move up in the street. So those are the 4 schemes, and I went through them kind of quickly, but I think it's useful to kind of just look at it at that level and see, broad brush stroke, these ideas about where the bulk of the building is, where the access and parking is, and where the pre-K is relative to the building. How, is it close? Is it actually within it? Is it fully separate? So happy to go back through any of these with any questions.
They all have the same square footage.
Yes.
How about parking spaces? They are the same.
More or less, yeah, they're all hovering around 150 parking spaces. Some of the versions are a little bit less, but this is very early days in laying out the parking. So we think that we're able to meet the parking needs in each of them.
In option 3 and 4, how are we proposing to get the pre-K to the common facilities?
So one of the things when we were doing the visioning was looking for synergies between the pre-K and the middle school. And the conclusion was that there's not a lot of obvious, like, yes, they have to be right there to use the gym. Like, it's not, so the types of synergies that we've talked about have been things like potentially the medical and nursing could be shared or at least kind of co-located with the middle school side and the PK side. Potentially there's some synergies with the administration that could be between them. But I think that, you know, feel free to jump in, but I think that the conclusion that we came to was that there wasn't like a obvious need for this to be directly adjacent. The lunch service will be prepared in the middle school cafeteria. So that's one consideration about the lunch getting kind of delivered. And so, you know, this is the furthest away. And is that a nuisance or not? That's one of the reasons we looked at option 2, where this was sort of close, but not touching.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is where is the parking in relation to the road and the building? And this one is kind of interesting because in option 3 as well, you're essentially putting the parking behind. So in some ways, the students looking out from the building are looking at the forest and fields beyond. It does have a little bit of operational. We really felt like that other approach, you could probably sort of start to meld the two together. And then the other version, you're sort of coming in and the parking is right there, option 1 and 2. And that may be preferable depending on how you see the sort of Senselgau Road. I had a few minutes extra to walk down there just this evening. It's, you know, a lovely forested space. The question is, what can we turn that into?
But then the other thing that came out of the workshops and last week's working group was whether or not the adjacency of the parking to Bow Road will support the athletics on the weekends with overflow parking. So I think, you know, each option has a different philosophical approach. And I think what we're looking for today is for you to tell us this piece works and that piece works, or that one really doesn't work. And then we can take all the pieces and, you know, put them together in a way that, you know, we can summarize it and bring back refined options next week. I mean, if there's one option that you all love and get consensus, that would be fantastic, but we know it's a process. But if everybody agrees that there's a preference for parking to be on Bell Road, you know, we'd love to hear that. Or, you know, as you're asking about preschool, like, we need more of that feedback.
I know it's early to tell, but do we know what the cost offset is for having it as a separate building as opposed to combined into one building?
At the moment, we're sort of saying, what if it was cost neutral? And I think we have to kind of go back and look at that.
How would you achieve that though?
The question in my mind, at least, is the pre-K, a smaller building, maybe wood frame, maybe not wood frame. Certainly you could have a lower floor-to-floor volume. Probably, depending on the building systems, they're getting more and more independent of each other. You know, the big central boiler is not part of the world. Heading forward in the electric, all-electric building, which we're sort of anticipating this will want to be. So you may not have that. You may have some premium, but you may get some benefits. And so we're sort of at the moment saying, well, what if it's cost neutral? How does that
I
impact?
say it because I think we'd need to sell it that way.
I agree. We want to
I
look at
think
it
cost
and
is going to
understand
be a big thing with this.
Oh, for
in
sure.
town with this, as you know, what all your projects are, right? But
I guess
in
what I-
particular, in Milton right now with the current political climate, I think we got to be really conscious of being able to justify, all right, this is a separate building. Guess what? It costs the same and this is how.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, we proposed one school. And the minute we separate them, right, in people's minds.
Yeah,
Like, right, and if the cost is higher because they're two separate, obviously we would have to work.
It's, yeah.
Instead of framing them, right?
We already know there's opposition. We're already seeing it in social media. We pay attention to social media and Milton. So they're already, so I think we just don't want to add fuel to it. We want to make sure we have the answer ahead of time to the test. So when they say this is going to cost more, we can say, well, actually, no, it's not.
Yeah.
it's gonna cost the same, and over the long haul, it's actually gonna cost less, because it's a more efficient system that we're putting in this building over here, which I'm sure you're already thinking of.
Don't jump ahead of me.
Also, too, though, more than just perception, we should be trying to pick a more economical approach, you know?
I mean, yeah, because one of my things we looked at, the previous facilities director, Bill Ritchie, looked at outside the high school doing modular construction to build some space out there. With a separate building like that, I don't know if you guys have experience with modular construction. Be an option that we could look at for that, knowing that it's a smaller type facility.
Yeah.
That leads into a second question.
So, two types of modulars.
Yep.
We have done pre-engineered buildings, which most people think of as Butler buildings. And fix those up in a way that supports a two-story building, while saving money on the steel framing and the delivery.
Actually, one of your projects you guys submitted on your proposal was a
Pre-engineered building.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we could call some up and show you in a minute. The other type is the sort of wood boxes like you see for construction, and those are coming in 60-foot lengths, and you can build them with sort of a classroom and a hallway, and then you put two together and you equal a whole classroom, and a half classroom in each box, and then you stack them up. We haven't seen the last time we looked at it was a while ago. We didn't see the sort of economics of that playing out well, but it doesn't mean we couldn't look at it. You would end up driving a bunch of boxes up, sticking them in place, and then putting a shell around it. And usually they come pretty finished up. The industry is pretty good for apartments. It's a little less developed for schools. And then the other tricky part is making sure that you're not getting stuck behind somebody in the fabrication process. So you're sort of going with as a builder, and as long as they can keep your schedule, then you're good. And if they get fall behind because of their issues, then you're stuck because you can't bring on a different crew and start working. So each has its little advantages. We could show you some examples of each. I think, to put a finer point, I was certainly expecting we would do some preliminary costing, because I agree with you guys both that you can't just say, oh, it's cost neutral and hope for the best. But we also think operationally and for other reasons may drive the discussion more than necessarily is it a little more or a little less.
So the next one I had, and Sean's gonna not listen on this one. The question I have is if you could do something that's modular or something like that, faster construction, could we split this into like, I don't want to do two projects funding wise, but construction wise, since you get the preschool operational first, you know what I mean, quicker, you know what I mean, and then phase it that way. So we've got a preschool up, we can free up space sooner in schools while we build the bigger building that might take longer time. So not that we have to answer that, but it's just when I see two buildings, it presents an opportunity that we may be able to do one much faster, get it open, get it going, address some of the needs we have right now while we're working on the bigger building.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think the main question starting in my mind for that is how do you separate the two? So you're leaving enough space for the contractor to be doing the big construction work.
Sean will figure all that out. Not this Sean, not Sean.
Okay.
So would you have them deliver the food from the high school to the prefab building?
So I'm looking at school committee members for preschool. Are they provided lunch?
Yeah, there are some, most preschools I have worked with are
But
full day preschools.
there's one, but most of the half day ones, they bring their own lunch, they eat in their own space.
They
don't-
definitely need their own space, they don't need access to cafeteria, but they are provided, they get access to the school lunches.
Yep.
So that would be a logistics that would need to be figured out.
Yeah,
As it relates to cooking and delivering.
I'm just saying, if fast track one, I mean, I love that idea, but there's the operational piece to it.
I wonder if it's from Tucker, like, or the high school, yeah.
Yep. The other one, could you guys also just talk about, like, we're talking overall square footages, could you keep the breakdown between the middle school square footage and the preschool square footage, because we're talking a total So,
Yeah, so the middle school square footage is, 141 and change, so we'll just say 142, right? And then the remaining of that 169 is preschool, so 28,000 feet, and that's, both of those are gross square footages, so the totals.
Back up to a different question for a second, just helps out with the merits of having a separate pre-K versus combining with the middle school. Just 3 of the 4 options show it as separate, so it seems like you favor that. Just like to understand why.
I can share from like whatever from Bernadette, which is a preference to having more separation between the young kids, the old kids, right, being able to create their own kind of school environment, right, have separate solutions, welcoming areas for the little kids, right, and simply being able to create your own separate kind of school environments, rather than being kind of just a floor within what would be primarily, obviously, an upper facility, and so just creating a little bit more separation is. I heard at least one. Yeah, that would be preferential, while still having some connection. I think the other piece in my mind, as I think about the separate building and the space next to it, as it's shown here, is, the idea of trying to future-proof this project. I think this project future-proofs our elementary schools really well by pulling out pre-K and 5th grade, and it helps Pierce really well by pulling out 6th grade out of Pierce, right? The one piece is the preschool right? If preschool expands to full-day preschool in the future, the amount of space we're building right now is not sufficient. And it's my understanding, at least, somebody correct me. And so being able to ensure that we have the ability, if the town so desires in the future, to move to a full-day pre-K, as many places are, to be able to expand that programming fairly easily and as least disruptive as a manner as possible by just adding on to the side of kind of in the space that is already kind of available for it. That to me, as I look at this, is very attractive to make sure that, like, while that's not in the next 3 years plan or anything, we don't want to be back in this spot where essentially we build a pre-K, we've already grown outside of it, now we got to build a new pre-K building somewhere else.
I was thinking that the same thing, that options 3 and 4 seem a lot more attractive from that perspective. If we're planning past our current need.
Of course, I gotta contradict you guys
Go ahead, go for it.
right now. I like option 2, and I'm gonna, 2 different reasons. I like that you separate the parking. I don't like the shopping mall feeling of having all the parking central on the site. And I think after listening to you, I like it as a separate building. However, I think I like the proximity of this building to the main building. Because I think there will be times, right? There's not gonna be a gym in the pre-K building. There'll be times they wanna use the gym more. And I don't know if we'll actually be able to buy the bridge idea, but I love that you're thinking that. 'Cause even if it's not an actual bridge, there'll be, kind of a,
covered walkway.
a covered walkway, yeah, but
Structures.
even as a metaphor, just connecting the 2 schools, I like the idea of it. And I see what you're saying about 3 and 4 too, but those are the very specific reasons I like this one. And I think functionally with, having coached several sports in this town, parking is always an issue after, outside of school activities. And I think it actually might help having them separate. Because there are times when you've got, baseball tournament and a dance recital going on at the same time. So it might be nice to have them not always on top of each other, but,
Just this evening, they're all stacked up on the road.
yeah, exactly. I mean, they're all very,
There's nothing going on.
Happens all-
all 4 versions, I think, I'm impressed by all 4 versions. I think the massing helps big time. And I like that you're not thinking of this building as a box. I like that you're talking about the stepping and the, seems like there's a lot of thought being put into the design already, even though we haven't really started to truly dig into the design. But that's all. That's my 2 cents.
In terms of lots, which of these buildings would be expected? Because our neighbors would be probably concerned about that. Would it be better to move pre-K look more nice compared to the middle school? Is that anything, or would they just be making nice? Is the distance even enough?
Are you thinking of the students, or are you thinking of the building?
I'm thinking of
Mechanical
yes, the elderly parents next to us. They'll be happy to hear, I assume that is conservation. Moving the noisier grid away from them as far as possible.
There are students and those in there. Yeah, it was kind of interesting, the option 3, I think, where in some ways we're trying to use the pre-K as a little bit of a buffer between the two. And if you think of the sort of back of a building facing them, you know, it's a little cleaner than, oh, we've got a big parking lot, driveway, playing area. But
I think also if you go to one of the plan options, there's 100-foot buffer between the property line and the backside of the building. That's just the property line and the backside. I don't remember how far the houses are from the property line, but that's all gonna be landscaped with trees, and we have like a dense protective layer that we're not seeing on the plans. You know, we haven't developed the landscape or what the tree layouts are, but you know, we're anticipating that zone is gonna be fairly dense. With those trees and bushes, it's gonna help mitigate any transference for sound. I think the houses themselves individually are, you know, much further south as well, but distance gives you additional protection.
I think the other piece is just so the only other option would be to move the middle school building down there, but then from a massing perspective, a 4-story building, 100 feet, which is much different than a 4-story building that's 600 feet away. And so I think that probably would be quieter to just have the back of a 4-story building there and almost use that as the buffer and push everything in front, because, you know, preschool kids running around playing on that play structure is not going to be silent. But I think from a visual standpoint, I think would be way worse for the and along the
Construction noise too, if you're building a building on that
Yeah,
side,
right.
it's gonna get loud.
Especially
Yeah.
Do they complain about the noise from the field?
question.
Do they complain about the noise from the games on the?
There are
field?
people that do, but it's usually 5 games a year maybe, so it's pretty, 4 or 5 Friday night games, so it's really not too
Yeah, I
bad.
feel like it didn't come up during the conversations either. It really was more the concern with the kids.
Mhm.
But I think also the way you have the playground there, it feels like it's still removed from, or further
Yeah.
from the residency. And I think it, to answer your question, I think it depends on the time of day, right? So it's the playtime for the little ones when they go out. But the good thing is that they don't all go out together at the same time. So that would sort of address some of those concerns. And then it's release time, that's when you, so that's all right. The morning time, the middle school, because I'm right there with the middle schoolers, it's when I hear them. Right? That you get more volume.
Andrew, can you jump to option 2 site plan just for a minute? Yeah, and I think here is sort of interesting because there's cars and parking nearer, and I think just how we screen that would be something to offer. In terms of building massing, it's relatively small. I put the building oriented to the north and south.
What about traffic considerations of having a massive parking lot versus 2 separate ones?
That's an interesting question. There's a little more efficiency. Sort of the parking along Guile Road is sort of wrapping itself around the curve there. A little less efficient, although we may be able to just keep working on it and see what we come up with.
The one thing that will come up too is, you know, again, the schedules. We're gonna have a high school schedule, middle school schedule, half day morning, half day afternoon schedule. So, you know, as we start engaging the traffic consultant and stuff like that, that's all the, you know, the inputs they'll be pulling in.
What about the environmental impact of having that big massive parking in the middle as opposed to breaking it up and having green space in between? Is there any thought about that?
I mean, breaking it up, it's still the same as square footage of, college space, whether it's asphalt, it's expensive than concrete, so that is sort of creating the island just by having that amount, you know, really reducing it by separating it. Maybe there's a little less road, I'm not quite sure, you have to kind of look at the plan, I mean, ideally there would be, and I think you kind of showed that a little bit on one where for centralized, you would have some green in that.
I mean, is that part of the environmental analysis that don't they make now porous materials that can?
Or maintain porous, pavements long-term.
Yeah, so they start to look at the stormwater, like that's what I'm saying, it's the same square footage, so it's not, rather you have this much over here and that much over there, it's the same amount of stormwater, it's the same amount of square footage. I think you kind of showing that like, there were planted islands in every row, and so I think we would kind of do that regardless of where the paving is. So I wouldn't say there's a real noticeable difference between the two. It might be different in terms of like, and I think there's something mentioned is like, what are you looking out on? You're obviously looking on parking from one side of the building, and all of them, you're looking at green space and all of them, so that I would say you might look at that a little bit more, like what are you really looking at? How from the windows, what do you see? And that would have a little bit more.
I mean, if you look at the shape of that parking, it's pretty efficient. But I appreciate your comment of, you know, does that start to feel like a shopping center? And that's the difference. You know, for me, it was interesting to see the buildings start to follow Dial Road, and the students are looking out onto the wetlands from one side of it. The other side, they're looking out on the other side.
That actually seemed like, the one with Dial Road seemed like traffic wise, I don't know if it's as efficient as far as how many spots you get. But traffic wise, the way people typically drive around the high school, that would work really well.
The option 2 or something?
Yeah.
So that then,
Assume that's one way in, one way out, right?
one sheet.
I also like this stuff. Maybe it's the same with square footage, parking lot, but it just looks, perception makes it.
Broken up feels better than one big space. Yeah.
I like having the parking closer to the fields, which I think would be the use of them in after hours. All the points that Glenn mentioned earlier.
I'm gonna have to park on the grass island anymore.
I'm guessing people will.
People park everywhere. I'm not joking. People park all over.
Yeah.
Just walk
Wherever they can fit
tonight.
their car, they'll put it.
Some interesting parking strategies.
Keeping the pre-K away from the middle school drop-off too is sometimes helpful where the parents are going different directions, the buses are separated, and it's a little less chaotic than either entrance, even if you, I know you're gonna split the times, but.
Yeah, but there's still gonna be some,
Yeah.
little bit of overlap.
It was interesting that they're actually operating that as a drop-off, as opposed to some of the pre-Ks we work with, the parents, caregivers stop, get out of the car, walk the child in, and get back in, so it's more of a parking lot approach. And, you know, something like this, you could probably manage it both ways. If there was some reason they decided to change operation, you could still have this parents or caregivers come in, park the car, walk the kid in, come out again, or sweep through. Have them come out of the car.
I also think having the smaller part of the building on the edge that's facing home inc might be appealing as well.
Yeah.
And is it one story, I can't remember, is the
This is
pre-K here, it's
two.
two stories?
Two-story.
Yeah. Yeah. Just feels always impactful on the neighbors.
Looking at, future expansion, the way it lines up right now, you know, it's perfectly aligned with the middle school, but it doesn't really give you great opportunity looking for expansion, but if we move east or west, the expansion space would be available, it looks like.
We could still look at that
Mhm.
for an iteration.
A fair amount of space right now in the front of the building.
Yeah.
Probably too much.
I think your point, Scott, not align it with the corner of the building, just shift it.
Mhm.
The other thing we're trying to chase down is whether we actually need this road going around the back of the building.
Yeah,
For fire access.
I did get a lot more information from Paul today. We haven't been able to analyze it and really integrate it, but there are dimensional requirements for how far the fire hose on the truck can go. So you can stop the truck on pavement and extend the fire hose a certain amount of distance. And based on that, there may be opportunities to trim back that road that goes along the field, so that there's no paving back there. But we really need to get into a much deeper dimensional analysis to make sure it works. Because when you do something like that, you need to make sure that the fire truck can either reverse back out or turn around. So there are other constraints that we're optimistic that we'll be able to cut some of that roadway paving out. But we just need to get to a deeper study to confirm that it happens. So we're taking the conservative view right now.
In that situation, though, would you need to move the finger, like no longer have the classroom wing be there and instead use the auditorium or gym to be along that line? Because essentially you're gonna use the building as a retaining wall, right? I assume,
Yeah.
which means that you're really not gonna have windows. You're gonna have windows looking at it. Right, the building's gonna be kind of holding all that stuff back. So
Oh, I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I think, do you want to take it? Like I have
No, go for
different
it,
ideas than you.
Sure.
I think, well, a retaining wall is not definitive or not, but once we start looking at it sectionally, it might, there might be a reason to have it anyway, to give some flattened outdoor space for middle school students or, other opportunities for outdoor classrooms. Like, we haven't gotten to that level, so it would be nice to not have the expense of a retaining wall.
Yeah.
But there may be other reasons, despite not having a road, to have it as well. I'm trying to keep my options open.
Yeah, so not having the road actually, you don't, potentially you would need to.
Potentially, but, right now, one of the next levels to understand what kind of outdoor spaces we have. And how does that benefit the middle school students, right? Like, there's a prescribed amount of outdoor square footage for the pre-K, but what happens within the school? So I think that's just the next level of investigation.
I'm sure you're going to have a question. Someone other than just your team look at traffic flow.
Yeah, so we
You
do
don't want to
have
put a bottleneck.
right, so we do have a traffic consultant who's doing the current analysis of the existing traffic flows that will help feed into what will happen when we put a building on the site, and how does that change things? So he's writing that report, and we should be getting that information soon. And then once we decide on one plan, one option, he'll look at that more deeply to understand how the existing traffic flow will change with the new building. And then, I'm talking about outdoor classroom and stuff, we do have a landscape architect. Again, once you get to one option, we'll be engaging with all these consultants who will give us input with these deeper dives.
Do you know what the, gross square footage of Pierce is?
152,000 square feet.
So when you look at the square footage for what we be providing at Pierce, as we pull the sixth grade out of, as we pull a grade out of there, we'll have a school right size for 2 grade levels there. And we're doing a similar school here. It's basically a little similar size, actually a little bit smaller when we measure everything and stuff like that. So that was one of the things we've been looking at too, is as a apples to apples comparison of, how big would this building be? When we're meeting with the district and talking to teachers, that may not understand, like, how big is this room here that we're in? Trying to give them some visual metrics that they can kind of understand space and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've been out of the game a while, but I know when I was still doing schools, we came up with some funky ways to do fire access roads for, and I know in Dover, we were able to put one in without having it paved. I mean, I gotta go back.
Yeah, you can do structured pavement.
Yeah, but it gets expensive, right?
Yeah.
It's pricey if you do that.
It's tricky. It's tricky. We'd much rather say, okay, this.
Dover had a lot of money to spend.
Yeah, and that's the thing is a lot of it, these things are so darn heavy, the pump trucks are full of water.
But you're right, it might not, functionally, it might make sense to just have it be a paved road.
We, again,
And
the
only has to
biggest
be,
thing is the space that goes through there and whether we.
I figured, how wide do they have to be? I would say
Right now, we're showing 20 feet.
20 feet, is that so?
We can probably skinny that down if it was a one-way just fire.
Right.
access.
Yeah, I mean, the big one, when I look at it, is that bottom turn, that's like, it's a 90-degree angle.
Well, he nailed it, you make it fire access only, which, I know, I don't leave for anyone to use that.
Which one?
The 90-degree.
Oh, that one there?
Oh, yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
soften that a little bit, yeah.
But I know we'll get there on that. I'm trying not
I mean, we
to.
gotta figure out.
I'm not typing that. But yeah,
That's gonna make it.
We'll figure that out.
I think people always find the shortest path, whether you create the path for them or not. So for that lower area of parking in the southwest, when people park there to go up to the main field, that, you know, if that road's not there, they're gonna create a path. So, you know, maybe we think about it, it's not there, maybe there's a stair that goes up and connects to the field in a way to get to the high school, just some connectivity on that backside, so we're not forcing people to try and walk around out to Guile Road.
We talked about that on the scheme one, of whether, we talked about on scheme one, whether you could have a connection through the building or from the middle school out onto the upper level of the field.
Well, yeah, they wouldn't have to go into the field, you can, if you get up that level, so you can walk around, there could be a walking path outside of that.
You gotta walk around anyway.
Just a little, yeah.
They collect, they collect money, so you're gonna have to walk around to get to the football, for a football game anyway, or soccer, whatever.
Just from a site access, I think they prefer to have everyone coming in through the entrance that everybody uses right now. Yeah, where the bathrooms are, and
Yes.
it's controlled, you don't have people wandering out into the woods from the other side, it's just everyone goes in that same way.
We haven't explored too much the idea that the middle school kids are walking to the high school and vice versa. That's probably something that we can look at the various schemes.
Yeah, if you look at it, unless you're cutting across the field, it's either way, it's about this, I don't think one way or the other saves you on a distance from a circulation standpoint, so. I know we talked at one point about building an access road around the back corner of the field. So from the pre-K side in this scenario, it would be slightly closer, but, we just have to see if that would be worth the expense and the effort to put a path around the other side of the field if the distance you're saving isn't all that much.
You have that nice shrubbery that says Milton.
Yeah.
I mean, in this one, if we like to disconnect the pre-K, this almost seems easy enough to do the top the pre-K lane off, right? Shift it down.
Well, there's
kind of option too.
There's middle school
Yeah.
program above that.
Yeah, this one's got. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. You're right.
That's why that's option two,
This is one.
right? No, option two is the one with disconnect, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other building footprint is
Yeah.
bigger
I just like-
because you're not
like
stacked on top
parking
of
lot
the.
design.
Oh, we can revisit, we know in option two, it's not, we can revisit that.
Yeah, the piece along Guile Road is pretty simple on that option one. And, one thing we gotta figure out is where we can get buses stacked up. As well as some amount of cars, without taking up too much space for all that activity. The other interesting thing with this one is you're actually stepping down a little bit, but you don't quite see it in this view. A little bit of turbo change there. It sounds like folks like this version. Should we keep going with option one where it's at least part of the building? So we say, okay, we're gonna tease those two out a little further.
I think so.
And we'll see if we can help to put some brackets around some pricing.
And did I hear you say that you would try to look at option two to see if we could sort of thinking about the future and expansion? Okay. I think as long as we're thinking about that. I think to your point, as we go to, chances are we would move to an all day eventually. And that would mean that we wouldn't fit there anymore.
Yeah, we could look at a couple different ways to expand that.
We could design it to go up too.
Yeah,
I was gonna say.
that would be great.
I know it's,
It's a thing for little ones.
it's not as easy as it sounds, but it's not cheap at all. Cause you're gonna design your steel, if it's steel, you're gonna design your steel now to
It's very,
withstand that load later.
you can't really operate the school below it while you're building above it.
Right. Be difficult.
The amount of sound, and disruption to the kids versus doing
I
something.
mean, it's done in hospitals and stuff, and in the school, it'd be very difficult.
It's gonna happen in the summer.
Done a lot more.
Plan west for your expansion and parking at grade and having the first level of grade above parking. That could be your future expansion availability. So plan, okay, the little pre-K structure.
Yep.
Your expansion location is the land that is the parking lot. You expand plan west to the parking at grade. I mean, obviously you build piers and your first level, your first occupiable level is above the ground.
Oh, it's like the second floor, so it's like a
Second floor,
canopy, like
correct.
it's a, unfair. Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I'm not proposing we ever do that, I'm just saying to the extent one day they're looking for space to expand the pre-K, we gave it thought, we provided space.
Mhm.
There's still parking and there's more square
Right,
footage.
I understand what you're saying.
We don't think of this as a rectangle too, this is expandable as is, right?
That way, and then
We don't have to make it a bowling alley as an expansion, we could actually build off the edges, make it a U shape or an H shape building. And that might actually be more interesting.
right, there, I was.
You almost, yeah, you don't wanna create a barrack if, when you expand it later.
Didn't grab what I wanted. My shortcuts are not here.
Sounds like.
I don't even know what I'm trying to do. I still don't know how to win.
They don't know how to cut the paste.
Yeah.
Don't know how to draft the
I don't know what increase the enrollment.
Just doing something like that.
An L shape.
Yeah, so the future expansion is to.
I love blue beam. Blue beam's the best invention ever.
Or it's down here, or it's,
So that's the one I was thinking of, you could.
No, completely agree.
That's the future.
Yeah, that's a much more interesting expansion, I think, than,
Yeah.
That actually mimics the, what was it, the early childhood education center that we looked at one time. It was the V wing that was there, with classrooms.
Okay. So yeah,
So
I think there's a lot of
that's
options there for
definitely not
expanding.
down.
Yeah, this may, I don't know, I don't think there's anything around it, I do worry just about outdoor space being able to, at this point. Within any of them, we have outdoor spaces for pre-K, and I don't see any way to gain a significant amount of outdoor activity space for different kids without utilizing.
They would have to, yeah.
They need to go up to the
Yeah.
aisle. So. I don't know how much the high school uses for it,
I don't think anyone's gonna be using Old Island anytime soon. It's in pretty rough shape. There's holes, there's a lot of holes in it. It's just not safe right now.
That's the one in the upper part.
Yeah, down in the field, Lower Guile.
Hmm. It's interesting though, if you said, and who knows what improvements happen there, but would that be a space that you could target for the middle school?
Absolutely.
In which case we could think about
If the improvements go
Walkway.
forward, it'll probably get used by the high school and the middle school, I would imagine.
The current plan is to put a turf field out there, so there's been some controversy back and forth. So it's up in the air right now, but.
It's with the EP currently.
bureaucratic limbo. Okay. Okay, so, sounds like folks like option 2, we're gonna keep option 1 going, so we're saying we're pursuing 2 of them. And we'll bring back some more.
Yeah, any other questions, comments before we move on?
Pretty great options.
Thank you.
All right, cool. All right. Next one.
Sustainability.
We're going to talk about sustainability. No plans, nothing really to point to, but it might be helpful. We're gonna talk about sort of very high level, but lots of little things. Please ask me questions if I use a word or abbreviation or something that you're not quite sure what I'm talking about. We're gonna start here with kind of like, what are the basic requirements, what goes in the RFS, and what are we designing to? Talk a little bit about what else you're interested in studying further. I kind of put some things here, but really want to hear from you. So base requirements, the project's gonna meet the specialized energy code, so the stretch code plus the specialized energy code, and it's gonna be LEED certified. What level of certification wasn't specified in the RFS, so what I've kind of put under the study further is potentially talking about, is there an interest to go, based on the location of the site, the project would probably be, you know, there's not a lot of public transportation and things like that where you get a lot of points. And so I would say the project is probably hovering right around LEED silver, just as basic design and the way we design, maybe, I mean, the industry, not just aerospace. I would say it's probably silver is a very doable goal. I think you could easily get there. You wouldn't really be changing the design or necessarily adding cost to the project to do that. But if you wanted to talk about LEED gold or, you know, something beyond that, I don't think the project would be able to get the LEED platinum. And again, it's just the location limits you from getting credits and points that just you can't get, because you change your whole city or your whole town. That's not gonna happen. But gold is something to talk about if you're interested in that. So really today I wanted to see, is there things that you are thinking about in terms of sustainability that you wanted to explore, something that you're interested in that we might want to study further, or aspire to? Is the other way to sort of think about that, you know, beyond the basic requirements, which are the specialized code. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but essentially that's a net zero ready building, if you want to think about it that way. But it's not necessarily a net zero building. And on the LEED side, we could, you know, strive for something more if there's particular desire to go beyond and sort of explore going to a higher level.
Might be an opportunity with the separate early childhood building, maybe you could really do something. Maybe you could do a net zero if it's a small building, you want to crush up our budget. Just something to think about.
So you know, just set.
Yeah, if we had that as a separate building, I feel like we could do something special with that building, from a sustainability standpoint that might not be feasible on the larger school building, you know? I mean, it's gonna cost a lot of money, like she said, you're not gonna get platinum, you can't, even gold is probably going to cost some money.
Yeah, but if we can frame the conversation right now, just around LEED certification, you know what I mean? Is that something we feel strongly about that we want to go after and attain, or just use it as a guideline to go after stuff, but not really go certification, similar to what you talked about before, of, you know, paying extra money just to get a plaque on the wall.
I've done that. I've done a lead silver building that didn't get certified just
Right.
because we didn't track it.
Well, even the certification itself, it's basically a checklist that you get points for doing certain things, and if you get a certain amount of points for silver, next level's gold, and platinum. So part of the question is, are you, this community and this committee, do they want that LEED certification on the building, or do you want Arrow Street to guide you to efficient building, sustainable building, and not necessarily care so much about the LEED plaque that goes in the front of it?
What's the pros and cons?
Yeah,
I'll say those.
so the way that we think about this, if you want a LEED certified building, we're basically giving you a building that you could go and pay the third party to certify, and that cost is gonna be somewhere around 169,000 square feet. It's probably gonna be somewhere around $10,000. So it's relatively small amount compared to the whole construction process or cost. Because our process would be the same. If you wanted to be designed to LEED, we would need to do the calculations and the modeling, and we'd also have the contractor making sure that they're tracking and putting the right building materials and, you know, materials in there that are gonna support the air quality. So in terms of our process, you know, there's a little bit of cost savings on what I would call sort of the soft cost of like the design team and the contractor. But there's not a significant amount of cost there if you wanted to say that it was designed to LEED. Because we take that seriously, and we need to do the basically track that out, do the calculations, making sure that it could be that you could pay the certification fee. But you don't have to do the certification fee.
But once we get the certification, what do we get from it other than the plaque? Reputation.
Yeah, I mean, if
It's,
you think about other schools, you know, every school that does go through the MSBA process, which this project isn't, but all of those schools are required to be LEED silver, so there is some comparison, you know, there is that piece of this is what other new schools are doing, you know, that's something to potentially consider. I don't know, whether staff and staff retention, if they're looking for that, or if that's something that they would look at. But that would be the only other thing to kind of think about, what are other new schools doing in this league? And through that project, they do process for MSBA, they have to be LEED silver. And I would say that public charter schools are not typically going after LEED certifications, but other public schools that are not MSBA, I would say the majority of them we do are also following LEED, and do the certification.
Where does the specialized code compare to LEED? Is it like, if you hit that code, is it you automatically or basically hit a level of LEED, or is there still more that needs to be done to be certifiable?
So, I mean, the energy code is just looking at the energy piece, which is a lot of points in LEED, and that's why the project would pretty much be LEED silver, just by meeting the code, meeting the other ventilation and indoor air quality components that are code in the state, and just sort of the basic services of what you're putting in this building. So,
Because I think the other communities don't have specialized, I think there's only like 45 or something in the state right now that have adopted the specialized code. So Milton is we're requiring ourselves to be better or more energy efficient than a lot of the other towns, where I think some of the other towns are gonna go to the lead because they don't have that specialized code. That is a minimum project requirement.
yeah, the energy savings are actually all in the stretch code.
Okay,
So that's actually giving you the LEED points, you know, that are related to energy.
In the specialized code, electric.
The specialized code is not giving you much necessarily towards LEED.
Okay.
And then of course, if the school projects are going through MSBA, they actually get 3% additional reimbursement if they do a specialized code, even if their community doesn't cover it. So I think you'll see more projects going through that process doing.
You need to frame it to like specialized code that's there. You know, there's the option that we can bring fossil fuel into the site, build out the building with fossil fuels. We just have to parallel the design, build it out. So if they want to go electric in the future, they can do that. However, once we spend all that infrastructure, they're probably just going to want to go electric for everything and not double up, you know, piping and stuff like that for fossil fuels. So that's the one thing I see, you know, while we're doing this discussion, when we talk about specialized code and stuff like that, you know, for the size of the building, if we wanted to go with the fossil fuel based, heating, cooling systems, stuff like that, it would cost more because we'd have to double in the electrical with it. So, for that, it's easier just to do the electrical bypass that. I think that's basically you'll recommend too, is
Yeah.
an all electric building.
And, the lead piece here is not, we're early in the process. We can kind of tease this out through the
Mhm.
project. It's just good for us to know whether you're thinking of going beyond, are you definitely going to be lead? And if so, are you thinking of going beyond? There's not a ton of cost difference between silver and gold, but it is something we'll want to vet out and make sure that's the market thing if there is. It's not your big cost, right? Because your HVAC system, you're going to select that regardless of the LEED certification. That's really driven by code. So there is some cost there, but it's not significant. But we would do that estimate if we're interested in potentially understanding what that means.
And typically, like, for leading projects I've been involved in, you get the checklist and run down, there's definite yeses, there's definite no's, like you were saying, certain things we're not gonna qualify for. And then for this committee, we basically look at the maybes and try to figure out which ones we move over, each one.
I'd be interested in seeing what it takes to get to goal. I mean, it might be, as we go through the process, we might find it's almost nothing to get to that level. I'm not sure I'm convinced I would want to go for certification with LEED. And personally, done several buildings where we design to a certain level of LEED, but we don't go for the certification, so we don't add the layers of cost to them or the contractors. But doesn't mean you can't say we designed and built this to a LEED gold level. We don't have to apply for the certification, but you can still advertise that what you designed it to and built it to.
Yeah, I think it's a good list of criteria that is giving you a healthier, better performing building.
Like to see how close we are to it. Might not be much to achieve it. We did it, would be nice.
Given the specialized code and again, the point Sean made about being essentially incentivizing all electric building and the state's 2050 net zero goal, what I'd be interested in studying creation of a net zero building. The potential additional cost implications of.
Curious on that last slide too, like what else could we aspire to other than net zero?
Here we go.
Sure.
I recently worked on a living building challenge building, which seems to be restored to the environment that it's built in, not just less impactful to that environment, but leads to be less impactful. Net zero, we're trying to generate the same amount of energy we're using. A living building challenge building restores many aspects of the environment in which it's built. So I think that will be tremendously cost prohibitive. Yeah. Discuss it for chatting about getting certification.
Yeah, so that is something that would kind of fall in that aspire to. You could go all the way to living building challenge. It could be, something in between. We've had projects that are really focused not only on energy, but focused on water. Sometimes that's driven by the location that they are, the stormwater system that they're tied into, or the municipal water supply system. Sometimes it's just something that they're very interested in that isn't driven by that. And so that's another piece. You could go net zero water. It could be a focus on we're already going to be, if we're talking about LEED and just in general, the way that Air Street designs their projects, health and wellness are big components to them. But if you were really wanting to go, further with that, you could look at a well certification, which again is like LEED, but it's focused on health and wellness. And so those would be some of those. What else you might aspire to if there's, there was something very specific that you said we were really concerned about, this particular piece. We really want to make sure that it's woven through the project, but that's what they aspire to be. Could be. It doesn't have to be a certification. It could just be, like we really want to focus on water, so whether it's part of these or something else, so it might be.
Kate, the one that
Not
we're,
that you're not being aspirational by just doing these first two, I would like to say that too, right? Like, these are really high standards, to begin with, and so it's really, like, if there was something specific that you thought was important to your community, that you do not have to feel like, not everyone has that sort of extra power in the field.
I think the embodied carbon is something we're working on, and if you can get low carbon concrete or steel and things like that.
Stealing my thunder.
And then, the thing that's been in the back of my mind is if we have a small little pre-K, could you make it all wood framed? And then you'd be eliminating the steel.
Yep.
So that's,
Can you just talk about embodied carbon for other people? Obviously, the principle is something we need that we work with on a much project to transport. Talks about that all the time, just for people that may not know.
So there's operational carbon, which is what you would think of as your energy. So the lights, the heating, the cooling, your outlets, everything that's plugged in like that is all the carbon that comes from that. That's what we call operational carbon. And then the other bulk of carbon is what goes into basically manufacturing the materials, so making carpet, making drywall, making, steel. And then all of the transportation of that to your site, the carbon emissions from that, and then constructing it, so the emissions that happen on your construction site, and then over time. And so that's really locked in day one, right? Like, you have this carbon footprint just by building your building. And what is going to happen is we start to, and we've already been doing this for decades, reducing the amount of operational carbon. The amount of embodied carbon and its impact is quite significant, and will actually be one of the largest sources of emissions in the country and in the world. So we really want to think about that, because it's their day one. Plus, there's cyclical changes, right? You have to replace carpet over time. Every time you do any kind of alteration or upgrade, there's an amount of that embodied carbon that's coming, you're putting back. Most of it is there day one. And so things like concrete and steel are the two materials that have the most emissions associated with them as building materials. So what Larry was talking about was, wood frame materials, and that as a structural system is much lower embodied carbon than concrete or steel. But we can also do a lot with concrete and steel. We can replace the materials in the concrete and mixes to be lower embodied carbon components. We can be really efficient with steel. Embodied carbon actually ties really well with cost, because it inherently is less expensive to be more efficient with your system, because you don't need as much steel or concrete to obviously be fully secured and well-built buildings. And so that is another thing that we would do as part of our process in terms of efficiency. But there will be a time where cost is potentially a thought with embodied carbon. And so if you were really interested in embodied carbon, we could talk about that. And lots of the things that will help save it or lessen the amount of embodied carbon are going to be just cost neutral, like that, or potentially going to save money. But there will be some components that might cost more. And so that's where, unless you're really wanting to go further with embodied carbon, you might say, okay, it's cost prohibitive. We want to do this, and maybe we can't go all the way.
Is the premise of some of your current massing based on concrete and steel construction, or is that still open to interpretation? Like, you're looking at a mass timber, cross-laminated timber structure? Like, is that, have we locked ourselves out of that if we do the massing exercise?
No, I mean, the mapping would support either one of those, but that would be an example where cost, those systems do cost more. They save you time on construction, and, you could potentially save construction time costs.
I'm not convinced that they necessarily cost more. They often do.
We usually fight with the contractors because they're like, well, it costs this much more. And we're like, no, it really only costs this much more. Because in fact, they're saving some time and stuff like that. But it's something like a small building, especially, if you go with an option where the preschool is a separate building, that potentially doesn't cost more. You would actually do that potentially out of light framing, light wood.
I was gonna say, to my argument early on, let's reverse it. We could actually probably do that building cheaper. That may be a net savings,
That's what I'm saying.
depending on what we build that.
Think of it,
No, I agree. Yeah. I was just thinking steel,
Yeah, no, but you know, if you look at residential construction, the big, you know, four-story wood framing that's happening everywhere. It's a little hard to do with the fire protection requirements and the assembly uses in the school. So we haven't seen that come over and be used for wood framing. So you typically are doing CLT cross-laminated timber, which is more like big pieces of wood. And you know, as much as I'd love to chase it out a bit and see what the costs are, so far we haven't seen that be.
I'd love to go through that. We're doing a project in Charlestown right now where we have, cross-laminated timber, 14 inches thick, 8 feet by 65 feet long, and we have, light gauge, metal framing, at either end and in the middle structurally. We're doing layers of that on 5 stories, and I think that we'd be hard pressed to see that a steel and concrete building would be more expensive.
Yeah, let's look at it. I'm good. 'Cause I think, you know, to me, the question is, you know, how much drywall can we get rid of if you have all this wood? You know, and those kind of things, and is it giving you a very nice resonant space? But, you know, so far we haven't seen, but I'm happy to chase it around a little bit.
The hope is that the price on that will come down. It just hasn't quite moved yet. All construction costs are higher. We haven't seen that point where it's like.
Don't say.
So move on. This is an overview of some of the tasks that happened during feasibility and schematic design. On the left-hand side are some general tasks, and the right-hand side are related to HVAC and, you know, net zero. That's something we're looking at. We've already been doing some of these things, so revisioning. This right now is sort of like our introductory workshop. We're kind of talking through these things. At the end of feasibility, we want to know sort of what the owner's project requirements are. Basically, what are we, you know, then designing to further as the project moves into schematic design. And then on the HVAC side, it's really about understanding the HVAC systems that are potential systems and selecting a preferred option that is not necessarily the option, but a preferred option for pricing at this stage. It's not set in stone. That is, we will do in schematic design. We'll start doing energy modeling around multiple systems. We'll do life cycle cost assessment for those systems, and then at the end of schematic design, the final system would be selected. In pink, you'll see some things that we actually just talked about that are optional. They aren't necessarily, you know, a standard. We're doing in every project, and right now not in the base fee for this project, but we talked a little bit about net zero. There is a potential that we could do what is a very detailed net zero life cycle cost assessment. It is not necessary in order to do a net zero project. Oftentimes, the standard LCCA that we do, which looks at utilities, cost differences, operations and maintenance cost differences, and then over time, the different systems, that is usually enough to be able to feel like we select that system. The net zero, you know, detailed assessment would go much further into a cash flow analysis over, you know, a 30-year process, and look mostly at savings that you get from the net zero as opposed to net zero ready, which is solar savings if you're doing on-site solar. That is not typically necessary to be able to make the decision for a net zero building. And then on this side, we kind of talked about embodied carbon and life cycle assessment. We wouldn't typically do the life cycle assessment during this phase, unless that was something we were really interested in doing. But for LEED, we would be doing one of those in a later phase. It just wouldn't be doing it as cyclical instead of doing that process. And then a water LCCA, again, which is collecting rainwater and reusing it on site. And for some projects, it goes beyond that, and it's about collecting gray water and black water and treating them at site. And so we do these sometimes when that's a very specific request of the districts that we're working in, that typically it's because there's a very specific site condition where they have to look at this. And so that's why that's
Just one other too. So for the life cycle cost analysis, the detail that she was talking about is
The town of Lexington did a very detailed one. There's a good presentation online. If you guys want to see it, kind of dive into it. To, get a view of kind of, if we ask for it, what to expect on there. What they found is the operating cost of the building over a 30-year period was much, much less. And for them, when they were looking at the overall project, they understood the upfront costs to do some of this, but then weighed in the overall 30-year costs of operating the building. So I'll forward that around to everybody. It's a little boring, but as you can get into it a little bit, I mean, like you guys are numbers guys, so I'm sure it'll be exciting to you guys. But it's good to kind of see with some of these things that are here, we're talking about them, they sound really expensive. We're actually, making it so it's much more efficient. So over the course of the building and stuff will be less. So.
That assessment used to be more useful than gas, and we'll talk about this in the next slide here, when we were looking at gas systems and when gas systems were the cheapest system, where that is not the case anymore. And so we don't see as much benefit with the net zero life cycle cost assessment, because you see most of that in just doing the standard LCCA. And then we could talk about like what the savings are from PV without having to get into the detailed assessment. So I'm going to show some example. I don't have an example today of what the net zero assessment looks like, but it is similar to what Lexington did as well. But I do have an example of what the standard LCCA is. So I want to talk about energy code just for a little bit. The energy code, as we talked about earlier, there's a stretch code component, and there's a couple pathways that I'll talk about in a second. And then there's the specialized code, which is I always think about as a little hat on top. Most of the energy efficiency and reducing your energy happens in the stretch code. And then the specialized code is just really preparing you for electrification or being all electric day one. So on the stretch code side, there's two paths for schools. Essentially, there's a path to health certification, and it's like LEED, where a third party does a certification, you're given a certification fee, there's your document, and you get a certification. And the state of Massachusetts, when they created the 2023 stretch code, created a path that is essentially parallel to that, but didn't require you to go to the third party and pay for that certification. And so they tried to, as best they could, make a parallel to similar path, which has an energy modeling component plus prescriptive components to it. But they're trying to get at the same thing, essentially what we call path to test principles, path to test design principles, which is about focusing on the envelope and having a really thermally improved envelope, an airtight envelope that reduces the load, so you don't have to heat and cool as much because the envelope is a great envelope. And then having dedicated ventilation, so you get all that great air quality, but having that be a controlled system where you're also using energy recovery or recovering energy heat recovery in your ventilation as an efficiency process. So these are both trying to get to that. Our recommendation is to do the TEDI model for this project, unless you said we really want to do a path to health certification, because they are getting essentially to the same buildings. They might look slightly different, and I don't mean visually slightly different. This one might have a half-inch less insulation than that, because the way that they do their modeling is, not exactly the same as a different software. So we can't give you exactly the same result, but essentially it's giving you the same performance of the building. And so we'll talk about, actually, I'm just gonna go to the next slide, and then we'll go back to specialized code. So in terms of, the design side and then the construction side, between the two, it's really the same. All the stuff in white is the same. Your building the same system you pick for one is gonna be the same system that the other pathway would say works for that, and have the same envelope, essentially, and have the same windows. And pink are really the only two differences. It's new, so we've only got a few models. We talked to our colleagues both on the energy modeling side and architecture side to see what projects are you doing, because again, we have been doing this for years. We don't have a lot of examples. We are seeing that sometimes the TEDI process might require a little bit more installation in certain areas. It's not a given. We can't say that's a definite. I think this particular project, when I look at the massing and different massings and where the program spaces are, I don't think there's anything that's necessarily going to trigger that to be true. And then on the process side, I kind of mentioned this before, the certification fees. And the certification fees are not only for that certification, but on the construction side, we see pink there, that there's additional testing and verification that happens during construction. So there's some things that, either the Teddy Path will have to do, like air leakage testing, MEP commissioning. You might also be doing envelope commissioning through the lead process. The process that goes a little bit above and beyond that. So there's fees that are associated with soft costs. You have to hire a third-party verifier who is similar to a commissioning agent where they're hired directly by the owner, and they're going out there at different parts of the project, looking in terms of observing and inspecting what's happening and providing information back to the contractor of anything that is deficient. For a project of this size, we'd anticipate that cost for PASA certification, including all those soft costs that we just talked about, plus the fee that you pay to the third party to give you the certification, to be around $200,000 to $250,000 for the. So that is why we are recommending the Teddy Path right now in terms of that cost of that certification. So that's why we're recommending to do the Teddy Path with French code. And then the specialized code, there are 3 pathways, and Sean kind of mentioned, I'll start with the second one here. Sean mentioned that earlier, that you technically could have a mixed fuel building, meaning you have natural gas in the building. And for reasons in terms of cost, both the construction cost and operational cost, we'll talk about later why that is not necessarily the system you would want to do. But if for some reason you said you wanted to have gas in the building, you are held to more fees on the HVAC for heating and hot water. And then you need to install solar to the extent possible, meaning if you have a roof that's not blocked by buildings and trees, and you actually could generate renewables, you're required to put the renewables on, and you have to have a full electrification design. So that means that your electric service is designed day one to support a fully electrified building. You have to pre-wire the full building. You have to design all of the space inside the building. On the roof, you have to basically do design and plans that show exactly where all of those things would happen, where that equipment would come in the future. So this typically doesn't make sense for a school project. On the very top, there's a zero energy path, and that is providing renewable energy, solar PV on your building that can supply 100% of the energy use of the project. It is possible on this site, but it wouldn't be possible to do it all on the roof. So you'd be talking about large canopies over the majority, if not all of the parking areas. Based on the square footage, and the 3-story or the 4-story massing, and then 2 stories on the preschool, you probably should get it all on site, but it would be a little bit difficult. And so we, again, would recommend all electric path because that's where you're probably going to end up anyway with your systems already being all electric. And you could certainly add PV on site. While the code calls this the zero energy pathway, the industry also recognizes that zero energy buildings are not 100% on site. Either a combination of on site or off site, or completely off site, especially if you want to put it on site. So a net zero building, you would still be able to be a net zero building even if you didn't put 100% of your, in terms of what the industry recognizes as a net zero building. So there's different organizations and databases that very clearly define net zero as not being 100% on site, but for the energy code specifically, they consider 100% on site as what they're calling this zero energy. So we're going to talk high level about different systems. And again, the reason why I'm talking about only electrified systems here is because some of these systems are the exact same price or even less than a gas system, especially when you start to account for the electrification ready component that would be required if you had fossil fuels through specialized code. And then in terms of the operational side of these, especially if you can pair it with photovoltaics or some amount of photovoltaics, you're really using that to reduce your operational cost. And so there are generally 4 types of systems that would be appropriate for a school. The first one being a ground source heat pump system, which is a geothermal well field. So it's a closed loop, well that goes through the ground and basically uses the heat transfer of the ground and its heating and cooling system. The second one is sort of a version of that, that is a ground source, and we're not going to get too much into detail today, but so you can kind of consider those the same. They're both ground source. The second one would not be full cooling in your space, because it would be dehumidification, but not capable of full cooling. And that's really the main difference between those. And then the third option is a VRF system, or variable refrigerant flow system. And then the fourth system is an air-to-water heat pump chiller heating plant. The reason I have this little flash through it here is we don't recommend that system. And we'll kind of talk about the pros and cons in the next slide, and you'll see why. We don't recommend it, although it is, it is a system that would work for a school that's not about whether it's work or giving good public comfort and heating and cooling. Options 1 and 2, the ground source systems are the most efficient systems. They are definitely able to get to net zero, and the way that we define net zero, and again, that's an industry we, not Aerostreet we, net zero is defined as basically having an energy use intensity, or an EUI of 25. So that's a benchmark of how much energy we use per square foot in a building, and so 25 is or below is considered net zero. And the ground source heat pump systems would definitely be 25 or less. The VRF, it says maybe net zero, because it doesn't always get to that 25, even with a great efficient envelope. The VRF system is just not quite as efficient as the ground source system. And so sometimes when you run the energy models, it is really dependent on massing in sight, but not in a way that we can easily design and map the building to account for that overage. I just wanted to point one other thing out. So the first 2 here and number 4 have displacement ventilation, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. And number 3 has overhead ventilation. So we'll talk about overhead first. So this space has overhead ventilation. It's pretty typical. So you see it in most buildings you go to, where you have the air coming out up high, and it's basically at a higher velocity to get down to where we're all sitting. So this is where it's actually the breathing zone. And so that's creating a mixed air system. And that's the diagram on the left. And so the building will have good air quality just from the nature of new systems in terms of ventilation, rates, how much air changes over in the space, the filtration that happens on the equipment side. And so there will be good air quality in the space regardless of which option. Displacement has the ability to be a little bit better in terms of the air quality, just because displacement is delivering the air lower. So typically it's the wall towards the bottom half of the wall, and it's coming out where we're breathing. So where we're all sitting in the breathing zone, that's where the air is coming out. And so just by the nature of that, instead of mixing the space in order to get the comfort, it's able to deliver it down low where we need it, and then it's exhausted up high. So it's not mixing all of the air. And I find that I don't have to explain that too much now that we've gone through a pandemic. People are pretty savvy to why mixing the air might not be quite as good a quality as you deliver it all the pressure and then take the stale air out and having the mixing. So
just a question too, the displacement ventilation comes out at a lower CFM than the one above. So acoustics in a classroom, we have the lower CFM.
Yeah, so and that's why I say more improved indoor air quality, and you can probably read that in the back, because there will be good indoor air quality. It's just there is a slight improvement that you can see through displacement. And then the other 2 pieces are the acoustics, because we're not trying to get it, and this is obviously a very tall room, but even a regular typical height room, you have to supply it a much higher velocity to get down and create that mixing, where on the displacement you don't have to. So less velocity means you don't feel as much of a draft. You don't feel like, oh, I'm sitting underneath the duct and I can feel the heating or the cooling coming down on me. you essentially won't really notice it coming in. It's also quieter because it's not it's not blowing out at the same velocity as what you would see in the room. So there is a thermal comfort from that and acoustics. We have people who go into some of the schools that we design that have a displacement and they're leave it on. And so sometimes we get questions from staff because it's preventative, it's been so quiet. I'm like, is it on? I'm getting fresh air. It's like, yes, you notice that it wasn't on because you also wouldn't be getting the heating or cooling or comfort piece. So those are the two big things. You will get good air quality, you will get slightly better air quality with the displacement, but the acoustics and the thermal comfort are the two biggest components. And you'll notice that we talked about option 3, the VRF can't use the displacement, and so that is just the way that system, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. The way that it's delivering to the space just can't be through displacement. Where options 1 and 2 can do displacement, they can also do it.
Can you speak on the ability to cool though, because the dehumidification system, my experience, it cannot cool to the extent that like, a more traditional HVAC or VRF system can, and like, yeah, I know in the first one, the chiller pump, whatever. Yeah, can you just talk about kind of between those three, like what is the actual cooling effect within the spaces?
Yeah, so options 1, 3, and 4 can do just dehumidification, or they can, which would be a set point of say 78 degrees, or they can do full conditioning with full cooling, which would be a set point of 75 degrees. So they have the option to go down to that, or option 2 can only do dehumidification. They can't go to full cooling. And the way that it is with the ground source, in option 1 is basically this transfer with the ground coming in and goes into a heat pump chiller that creates either chilled water or hot water. And then that is running to your air handling units, that's running to radiant cooling in your spaces. Where option 2 is only doing sort of the heating side of that. And then on the cooling side, it basically removes chilled water from your building. And so because you don't have that chilled water, you can't get to that full cooling level. So you can do the dehumidification. We would do dehumidification in everything because dehumidification is that humidity is actually a lot of the component of cooling, being able to dehumidify that air. And I'm going to run through these quickly because we can always go back. This is just sort of the overview, but this is not option 1. You can see that there's essentially indoor units that are transferring with the ground wells. You still have rooftop units that are your air handling units. And in the classroom, you have displacement and you have radiant. And so radiant is heating and cooling at the perimeter, and that's just radiant heating and cooling, just like it sounds, where the displacement is providing your ventilation air, but it's not necessarily doing all of your heating or cooling. This is why the system is the most efficient because it decouples so that you get your heating and cooling the way that you need it to be, and you don't over-ventilate the space to get the heating or cooling because the heating and cooling is not also, the ventilation is not also what's giving your heating and cooling. So you can basically control those two things separately. Option 2, again, is very similar. We have indoor equipment and it's connected to your ground loop, and the classroom would look similar in the displacement, but it wouldn't have radiant cooling. It would only have radiant heating. So in the cooling season, you're basically relying on that ventilation to do the most cooling it can, which is the dehumidification thing. So that's really the main difference between them. And then VRF system, all of the equipment is on the roof. You have similar to the other 2 options where you're going to have a large, air handlers on the roof, but you also have small outdoor units that are sort of heat pumps and contributing to heating and cooling that are basically fan coils in the ceiling of the classroom. So we talked about acoustics from the overhead versus displacement, and just the nature of overhead, it is louder because of the velocity. And specifically to, if you're doing overhead with a VRF, that's a little bit louder as well, because there is moving mechanical motors in all of those ancillary units, in the ceiling. Whereas if you did it overhead with, say, a ground source system, that overhead would be a little bit noisier because you're, having air come down at high velocity, but the actual grill, if you will, looks like there's no moving part, there's no mechanical unit up there. But with a VRF, you have essentially a mechanical component in the ceiling that has motors. And then on option 4, basically has air handlers on the roof, it has heat pumps, heating chillers on the roof, with backup electric boilers, which would be in. So pros and cons, ground source heating and cooling, it's the most efficient system. It's the lowest operational cost in terms of both the utility costs, because you're saving energy and not paying for as much energy, but it's also the lowest operational cost in terms of operations and maintenance of the equipment. It's the lowest first cost after incentives. We'll talk about incentives next. It can achieve full cooling. The ground source, heat pump hot water generator number 2, it's most efficient, lowest operational cost, it's lowest first cost after incentives. It's very similar to option 1, it's really just the cooling piece that's different. The VRF, the pro would be that you don't need site for the well field, because you don't put any wells in, it's all contained in the building on the roof, and it is the lowest first cost before incentives, but not after. And so on the con side, typically with ground source, it's, do we have space? Can we put the well field in? We do have space on this particular site, so we can put a well field in, and then the cooling side. And then on the VRF, it's more rooftop equipment, it's also more indoor equipment, has more maintenance. Again, it's most of those, you have lots more rooftop equipment, plus if you imagine that diagram where it shows in every ceiling, you have all these equipment components that need filters and have motors, and there's a lot more equipment and maintenance. It may not get to net zero. And then on number 4, the air to water heat pump, it is the least efficient option, it's the highest utility cost. It's definitely not going to hit net zero, and it's not going to have the amount of incentives that you would get with any of the other systems. So it actually typically has the highest first cost factor.
So when you say not net zero, is that, I assume that's just the energy use intensity, not the low enough?
Yeah.
That's fine.
A couple questions, sorry. Filter wise, you said there's the VRF system, there are filters with the spaces. There wouldn't be filters within each of the diffusers within the wall or the other.
Right, so displacement is it's a grill, right? You're just passing air through it, and it's supposed to be the same as the overhead. It's just,
Gotcha.
so it's completely passive. There's nothing active in there. It's just a
Gotcha. I assume there are filters somewhere in the system.
yeah, the filter would be at the air handler.
Gotcha. And how big is the well field?
So for this building, the well field would probably be somewhere around maybe like 80 wells, maybe a little bit more depending on how deep they were. And so there's space on a 20-foot grid. So there's definitely, you would essentially, if you thought about it as the amount of parking you have right now, imagine wells being all that.
Or under the building.
We typically don't put wells under the building, especially in new construction. Not that there are necessarily things that you need to go back in the ground for. It usually is more of construction sequencing. So to be able to do the well field while you're also doing, foundations and things for the building, that's typically, we put them under buildings when they're existing buildings, because oftentimes back there you have space. But in new construction, we typically wouldn't put well fields under that.
Trying to preserve.
Yeah, and so that's why I say parking, because typically if you're not expanding necessarily on parking, meaning, I know you're talking about the columns before, like you could put columns down into the parking, but if you're going to put a whole new building on the parking, then you have to think about that if that was your.
So given the amount of parking on the site, that really a con for this particular project than the area for the well, like?
No,
It's
this is
basically a lot
a
of-
generic
Yeah,
site,
no, I- yeah.
so it's not specific to, so for this particular project, there is enough site area.
But your other point, it is so logistical challenge to get the well filled in, because you do start running out of space pretty quickly. If you're trying to build a building next to a place where you're installing well fields, that's something, a challenge we will have to overcome. And no matter what scenario we do, anything with wells.
And oftentimes we do start them a little bit earlier, depending on, you know, where the well fields are. So sometimes we do that, we start that before you want to do the full site work, just to get those in, because it takes time to.
Would doing that type of system mean essentially you have no RTUs, like there's nothing?
No,
on
so
your
you
roof?
still have RTUs, these are just supplying the heat, so the well field is just going to the heat pump chillers.
Yeah.
And then from there, you have hot water and chilled water going to your RTU. So
Okay.
it's basically just using the ground source as the heat sink as opposed to the air and a VRF is using essentially an air source heat pump.
Okay, I guess I was confused, more rooftop equipment isn't on for the VRF, just. What is the?
Yeah, so it's not the air handlers, it's all of the outdoor units for the VRF. So the VRF also has basically the outdoor unit, heat pump unit, for all of those.
I was thinking at some point we can take you guys on a tour of some of this things and start to see it. That's of interest.
And I'm not gonna go through this whole thing, but this essentially is what the life cycle cost assessment will look like, but with numbers on it. So right now, this is just showing comparative, where the full circles are better performing in the metric, and then the open circles are less performing. None of them are underperforming, this is all just relative to the systems you see here. But in the LCCA, we essentially fill in, not the qualitative components like indoor air quality and thermal comfort and acoustics, but it's, the energy costs and operations and maintenance costs, the capital construction investment after incentives, and then the number of years in the payback. So that part of the chart would be filled in the website. And I just wanted to touch on incentives today. Briefly, there are federal incentives, there are state incentives. The federal incentives are basically tax credits, which now municipalities can get that through a direct payment. And on the state side, there's MATV, which you're probably all familiar with. And there's two paths. One is a path where your project is net zero ready or 25 or less EUI, and the path two is if you're not able to hit that 25 or less, in path two. Just quickly, federal program, as I mentioned, direct pay, which essentially is a check after the building is built and placed in service that you would apply for. Essentially, you're applying for the pre-filing registration after construction, and then you're filing essentially a tax return, and you get direct payment after that. So it's similar to MATV where it's after construction and after the building is built. It's going for that. So it's like a reimbursement in that way. The federal incentives are really just targeted towards technology. The technologies that would potentially be in the school building would be solar, or ground source heat pumps, which we just talked about, or EV charging. EV charging is not applicable to this site because we're not in the census tract that allows that. So at the bottom here, you can see solar and ground source are the two potential technologies that you might have in a building that you could get federal incentive money for. And you would get between 30 and 40% on the solar side, and that's just based on how much of the content could be domestically produced, which is much more difficult today right now for solar. A lot of it is not produced in the country. And on the ground source side, it's much more easy to get domestic content, and so you'd be looking at 40%. That's 40% of the whole cost of that system. So it's not just the ground wells, it's all of the HVAC equipment that is fed through those. So it's the majority of the HVAC system. If you were going to use tax exempt bonds for this project, those rates are reduced, and you have to account for the tax exempt bonds. So 30% would really be half, and the 40% would really be 34%. So this is just a, example using a building under 69,000 square feet with estimated amount of heating capacity and number of, well fields and the cost for that. We obviously haven't been estimating for the project yet, but this just gives you on the left-hand side, a ground source heat pump, and on the right-hand side, an air source heat pump, which is the VRF system. You can see at the top that they both have solar, and we're just assuming that they all have solar, the same amount of solar. The ground source obviously has ground source, so you can go after the federal incentives for that. We wouldn't be able to do that because you don't have ground source in the VRF system. And then path one is the mass safe path. You get a lot more incentive for that pathway than is eligible for the path two. And again, that's the 25 EUI. And typically the VRF can't get to that, so it would be path two. You can see the difference between the 1.8 and the 340. I just showed an example of there's EV charging. There is incentives for that. It's obviously not the bulk of the incentive. So you can just see the difference between the ground source and the air source. And earlier when I was talking about the ground source is going to be your lowest cost option when you factor in the incentives, and that's because they are extremely heavily incentivized to do the ground source system because they are the most efficient systems as well. And so this is sort of teeing up the conversation as we go through this to know what system is your baseline system for pricing in the first place.
Thank you. Are you looking for any response, right?
No, so-
I don't know if we should have guidance on any of this, or is this just an education for what's going on?
Well, part of it right now is, you know, we're looking to get into pricing at some point soon so that we can, you know, come to some options. We share the screen.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
was trying to share the room with everyone in the call.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have is I know these construction costs are just estimated. They're not, you know, the construction costs we're looking at this project and like this.
I mean, they're recent construction costs,
Mhm.
from different projects, but it's sort of
Yeah.
calculated and estimated.
But, so if I just add up what we have for construction costs and the ground source heat pump, we're at, you know, $2.23 million for the total, whatever's listed there for the total construction costs, right? And then if we look at construction costs in the other one, we're roughly at $3 million. Is that-
But that's not correct, because
Yep.
there's no HVAC system on the second one,
Okay.
because it doesn't have ground source.
Yeah, I'm just
So that
asking for
20 million
clarification. in case
Might be
people-
19 million
Okay,
for the
yep.
air source.
Okay, that's kind of, that's where I was asking.
Yeah, you
Just to
can't,
make-
you can't
Yeah.
just add up. the
Yeah,
columns.
yeah, because if you're looking at it, just adding up the columns, it's, you know, way different on there and stuff like that.
Under the air source heat pump, it says NA, but there are costs for that system.
Okay.
Right. It's not applicable for incentives. You can't get any incentives.
Gotcha. So there are additional construction costs to
Right.
kind of bring them together.
Right, yeah, this is
Okay.
not really to
Yep.
show construction costs of each system, it's just to show the incentives for that system.
Okay.
And obviously, the construction cost of that is there because you can.
Correct. So the overall construction costs, like when we start adding them up between the two systems, somewhat similar, but the incentives that we can get are more. The free money we get from the government is more there for ground sources.
You will, the ground source heat pump will say the difference between the ground source and the VRF system is 1%, like without any incentive.
Yeah.
Once you factor in incentive, the air source for the VRF system will probably be 2 to 3% more.
What's the downside of option one versus option two, given option one provides greater cooling? Assuming more costly, right?
Yeah, so you have to think about, you know, sort of bridge financing that, because these are all, this incentive is at the rate, we have to finance the building up front. So there's obviously risk to do that, or a process to do that. Because you have to, if the whole project costs $100 million financing, and you're gonna get, you know, 10 million back later, so that is something you have to factor in. Because it's not nothing, you're relying on a lot of incentives that you don't get until, you know, a year after the building is done, potentially, you know, a year and a half, even 2 years. When you fall in the cycle, especially for the federal funds. So that's one piece you have to consider with it.
That's the difference though between the VRF and the ground sources, right? I think my question was more on the two different ground sources, the chiller versus the non-chiller. I mean, it seems like it's not, the chiller is the one that in rising, you know, temperatures and things like that, like provide us the ability to chill. That was some feedback we got from one of the buildings we visited, where they were like, the buildings are like, it's only dehumidification, there's no cooling, and so that's one of the things that's like regretted about the new construction. So I just don't know the difference between that or not for.
So we actually, most of our projects that are ground source are option one. We're working on a project right now where they wanted to look at option two, and we were like, okay, and we're working with the engineers to figure out, like, does it make sense? They just didn't want chilled water in the system, chilled water lines, which is, you know, it's common to buildings, but this particular person didn't want chilled water. So then we were like, okay, well, are you gonna really see savings? And so the life cycle cost analysis basically shows that there wasn't savings construction wise from doing that. It was very negligible between the two. And then of course they don't get full cooling, but that was just a preference. So that's why it's on here, but it's not typically the system that we would propose or, you know,
I mean, I don't know if we're looking for sort of guidance at this particular point, but from your presentation, it's very compelling to me to go with option one. Just for sort of the, obviously the estimated incentives, and also just the fact that the temperature changes that we're seeing, we do need to have a building that can chill.
Is there any issue with the, I think I didn't answer this, but obviously VRF is much more tested system, right? It's been around longer, is that fair to say, than ground?
you know, ground source has been around longer than Europe, that was in there. Even if you look at Europe, they've been doing everything longer than we have in terms of the system. Ground source is been around. VRF is still, you know, been around for a long time. We talked about it, so the maintenance challenges, the maintenance cost is, you know, significantly just having more equipment with everything parts to it. The other thing with VRF is that refrigerants do change over time. Those systems also don't have as long as a replacement life, so you know, back when you can do every 15 to 20 years. And so there is sometimes a risk factor in that. We know right now that the refrigerants are actually changing as we speak. And then we'll be kind of, you know, in a couple of years, we'll be into the new refrigerant, but that could also change over time too. And so there is some risk that we might have to replace refrigerant lines in the building where the refrigerant change, if some of the refrigerants don't work for the same. So that is, it's not a known risk, like we know in 5 years we're going to change that pipe and it's not going to work. We don't know that in certainty, but it is sort of a bit of a risk in change, because in the past when it's changed, it's impacted pipe sizing. But it's really something we can anticipate.
One of the questions I had from Larry, we walked the Acton Marksboro project, and they have a ground source heat pump there. We got to see everything. You know, as you talk about replacement and stuff like that, I'm wondering, you know, for all the wells that we have in the parking lot and stuff like that, is there a lifespan on those? And you know, if so, at some point, you know, how do you replace those if you need to?
So the wells should last for 100 years at least, so we don't anticipate anything in the well field, so that's the vertical well.
Yep.
In the horizontal wells, you have to know that they're there, right? Because you don't have to digging a hole because that's horizontal, those are 4 to 5 feet under the ground, so accessibility relatively big in the hole. The equipment side is really for the replacement side is all on the inside of the building, but that, like, maybe service regularly and all.
There's some pumps though for the ground first.
They're not what located in the field, right?
Right, so the pumps are inside of the mechanical, the main pumps are not in what Larry's referring to. There's a vault that kind of collects a lot of the well fields, it's called a vault, which is the pump structure, has a in the building, and then, into the building, there is some equipment in there, that might be maintenance. It's not like routine maintenance.
Yeah, my question was more, thank you for answering, it was more like 20 feet on center wells that are going to be spread out over the entire parking lot. So, just 20 years from now, we don't have to dig up the entire parking lot, pull everything, like, put it back in. That's essentially.
Yeah, and, it is an older technology, they, in terms of the DRS, these are not open wells. 30 years ago, we were doing open wells, which had a set of issues with them, and that's not, these are closed, well, the testing commission, beginning and even anticipate that there would be.
Yeah, just one follow-up. I know we're planning on doing borings at some point soon. Will that information help influence whether this is a good site for a ground source heat pump, or is it just known any geological strata as we go down into it? This is all good.
You can put them in anything.
Mhm.
Rock is actually better, which is something counterintuitive. And in terms of what would impact it, we won't necessarily know that from the boring. But if we're definitely looking at ground source, then in schematic design, we would suggest having a geotechnical geothermal consultant do a depth assessment, and they will use the current as well as other information. Because then you can anticipate, based on the borings and other things that are known, if you had like how high groundwater, you could say, okay, we think there's going to be more dewatering.
There'll be some deal.
Well, it depends, so let's say in Acton, we were in the fissures in the rock where the water was moving, and so that was coming up and there was a lot of dewatering. We just put 2 test wells in Quincy and they went in the day and they're dry. And
We expected a lot of dewatering.
we thought for sure it was gonna be a ton.
Yeah, we mentioned Lowell Field earlier, that's the drainage plan for the high school, and there's a lot of groundwater there.
Yeah,
Other parts of the site may be fine, you're right.
but when they put the first pipe in, it's really the issue of when they're pouring it. They put a pipe down and that pretty much keeps it, but it's when you open it up.
They might hit rock on the site too, though, right?
It's right.
We'll find out.
Won't be outside of the realm of possibilities in Milton.
And then the other one I had too is, we talked about solar photovoltaics. Is there any opportunities or anything about solar hot water or anything like that you guys typically do, or is that just like an abandoned one?
It wouldn't make much sense here because you don't have a high
Hot water
load. We've done them in the past. I think, we did it for the pool, even though it was outdoors, they wanted to be able to extend, we didn't really actually get more in the Labor Day. And so they made sense there, but there wouldn't be, even with a full kitchen here, wouldn't have enough hot water.
And just for clarity, we're not putting a pool on. Right? I just want to make sure. Cool.
And isn't there some better efficiencies with the ground source? You have a steadier temperature.
That's what makes that system the most efficient, because the ground temperature is always a steady state, whereas with the air temperature can be, -5 to 100, and so you don't get as much.
And that can be a challenge for them too when it gets real cold outside. They're not enough heat in the air. The air source.
With the air, yeah. I mean, they're rated for, -5, and they're getting better every day. Okay, so for a school, we wouldn't typically be concerned about that, like a critical facility or.
So one last thing on displacement ventilation, if you guys are ever flying out of the new Terminal E over at Massport, the big red building, it is 100% displacement ventilation. It's a really cool interior. You'll see big column interiors that are there, and it's basically that's where all the fresh air comes in. And similar to your photo that was there, I was involved heavily on the initial concepts of that. And because it's such a big atrium space, it just lends itself for displacement ventilation very well. So, to the point, if you're traveling through there, you'll see it. Very nice.
Yeah, because otherwise we're trying to throw the air from up above.
Yeah, it became totally inefficient, and I can go on for hours on that one about, you know, different thermal constraints on the chilled water and hot water lines we have to do, so. Cool. Any other questions? Sorry, went off on a tangent. All right. All right, that closes out item 4, which is old business. Item 5, which is new business. I think we just covered all our new business, so we'll adjust those for next time. Item 6 is future meeting dates. So I think our next meeting is next week.
We have one on the calendar next week, yes.
So, you know, as you can see, we're starting to make, you know, progress faster and faster, you know what I mean? So, you know, I appreciate everybody showing up tonight. It's good to have, you know, full attendance, and for the people that weren't here last week, you know, John Verhane is our newest member from the select board. So there's a few members that weren't here last week. So just introducing them for everyone. I apologize, John, I should have done that.
That's okay, that's fine.
You introduced us.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
What was that one?
I like munchkins, I could bring my.
So yeah, just for everybody, if everybody's good for next week, we'll just hold that and kind of keep it going. So any further questions on anything there?
Will you be sharing the next,
I said you should have an email. I probably sent it an hour before this meeting, probably 5:45. It should be in your inbox. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So, next thing, item 7, adjournment.
Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll move. We're all in person, so all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Yeah, welcome to the fun.